So first of all, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon, Rob and I this afternoon. My name's Paul Finnis, as you probably know, but welcome to another in the series of kind of webinars or podcasts. I'm not sure what they're called. Rob knows more about this than I do too, but that the Digital Poverty Alliance has been running. Today I'm joined by Rob Price, who has amongst a whole variety of things, I have to say, but has recently led and been part of this international group developing, I was going to call it a concept, Rob, but you'll probably correct me on that actually, but a movement perhaps, the concept, not sure that's the right word, but of corporate digital responsibility. So a big welcome to you, Rob.
Thanks, Paul. And it's you're right. I don't know what the right word is. I tend to use movement actually, simply because it's something that is happening all over the place rather than something that's controlled or directed. I see my role as a joiner of dots, connecting the dots between the various things that are happening.
I love that. I love that, not least because it was one of the things that we absolutely share, and we'll come back to that in a bit more detail. I think this idea that we recognize lots of great work going on out there, but when it is disconnected, it doesn't always achieve the things you want to do. It means people doing slightly different things in slightly different ways and stuff, and that's fine. But some kind of
And isn't it brilliant to find things that are happening that you know that you've had no direct involvement in, but actually it's connected. I mean, the most extreme example I think I had recently was I saw an article, as you do, in the Borneo Post, and it was the Premier of Borneo committing all of public sector in Borneo to CDR. And I was thinking, well, how in the hell's that happened? What have it done to me?
Yeah,
I hadn't done anything. It's just it was picked up elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, we'll get into that in a bit more detail, but also this idea that when you see these things, when you come across them, particularly in that kind of random fashion, is that actually what you find is often they're in a very similar place with very similar kind of descriptions and ideas and things as others, with some differences and that kind of stuff. So sometimes it's quite reassuring to feel that people have got to the same place as you did, but coming at it from different perspectives and stuff. But wonderful. So I will just say, for the sake of those people who are joining us today, is that this is, as you probably already tell, is quite a sort of informal, and we call it a fireside chat. But I'm pleased to say that there's no fire today, but that's basically because the temperature's crept above freezing for the first time for a while. But and we've got something about 45 minutes or so to talk through and things. So it is being recorded. So please, if you have to drop out for whatever reason, then please you can come back and catch the rest of it on a recording. And Ellie, our fantastic head of digital at DPA, will be tweeting on this as well. So there'll be plenty of places where you can pick up the information and things. So Rob, you and I agreed very roughly a kind of structure for this afternoon. I say because it's informal, I didn't want to kind of make it too formal and stuff. But so first of all, a quick couple of introductions from you and I, just to sort of set the scene for people, so that people know who we are and where we come from. And then, but really, I want to get into this whole area of the corporate digital responsibility, which I know is something that's piqued a lot of interest amongst our audiences and things, and particularly your kind of involvement and motivations and role in all of that. And then which will catch up with the manifesto and the 7 principles again, which I really look forward to talking to you more about. Then we're going to, if it's okay, I'm quite selfish from my point of view, this idea that we could look at a little bit about how the corporate digital responsibility and the TPA might work together. This kind of idea that there are many core things that we share, and I love the fact that there are, as you said, as we were saying earlier on, that these things are coming together. So really important from a kind of emphasis point of view. So the things we can do which can emphasize things, and there are things which we can do which can stop duplication and that kind of thing. And then actually just also, because sometimes we miss these things, you're a person too, and I've been struck by the range of things that you've been involved with as a kind of professional, but also as an individual, because of course you do lots of stuff on the voluntary side, and there's something about London 2012 as well, which you did some years ago, which I'd be fascinated to hear a little bit more about. So we'll do that. So it sounds okay for you, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay. Since I hogged the first couple of 3 minutes, I thought what I might do is ask you to do your intro first, and then come back to me, and then we'll get into the kind of meat of things, if that's right.
Yeah, cool. So it's where to start. So I think firstly, I tend to count myself as a technologist. Started many years ago, coding. A long time ago. and why that's important is I think the subjects that we're talking about today, we each come at from different perspectives. So I come at it from the perspective of, in part, technologist and in part exec person within businesses. So I've done a number of senior roles, whether a consulting partner or chief digital officer or chief operating officer, interestingly fusing the COO and CDO role in my previous job. So my background is digital transformation at scale. I've worked with international organisations, I've worked with UK government, I delivered Transport Direct, how to plan any journey from anywhere to anywhere in the UK 20 years ago or something like that, before Google had done it. So I like using new technologies to make an impact on people's lives. And I guess that's, and we'll come later to the story of how I ended up talking about CDR, but fundamentally that's what I've been doing. It's how do we use technology in positive ways. If I go back to my childhood, my teenage years, I did a lot of voluntary work using, I mean, this was early 80s, so a long time ago, using things like Tandy TRS-80s to enable people with severe disability to communicate. So again, it's using it comes back to my background is taking technology and enabling it to make people's lives better in some way, however I can possibly do that. Outside of that, I'm living in the East Midlands, so I'm Nottingham kind of area, grown up, still live there, worked in London most of my life, or various kind of European cities as I've kind of dived around the place. Big sports fan, that's kind of relates in part back to your point about the Olympics. What better thing to do than get involved in something that's about sports and about technology? That was a really cool time. And probably kind of no doubt other things that will crop up in the conversation. I'll hold the conversation around how did you get to CDR maybe for the next bit after the intro.
Brilliant. And I think on top of all of that, you know, we talked earlier on too about fathers and, you know, being a father and that kind of stuff as well. And I think I just have to warn people that, you know, there could be my two small ones running around at some point or other because they're still on holiday and stuff. But I think Rob's you've warned yours to kind of.
I messaged them earlier to say, well, I think as I said, Paul, they're not up and out of bed yet. Mine are older, kind of older teenage. So they're still hiding in their bedrooms, and I've told them to continue hiding there for the moment.
Okay, yeah, good. Which is a great invite, I'm sure, at that kind of age is perfect. But so let me, rather than talk about myself, I was going to, if it's okay, just talk a little bit about the DPA, because that's how people best know me and stuff. But I mirror many of your kind of views. I did some volunteering just like you when I was very young, and that was always the kind of the most interesting parts of my life, the things that interested me the most. So from my point of view, the opportunity to get involved from a work perspective in doing work, you know, with and for and other people was just always much more exciting and interesting and things. So yeah, I share that with you for sure. But what I'll say is that numbers of people listening today will already know, and I know I've seen some names come up of people who are joining who already know us well, and one or two of our ambassadors and things. But the DPA was really born out of the work of a charity called the Learning Foundation, which has been around for 21 years. We celebrated our 21st birthday last year. And that has, as an organization, has always been focusing on helping schools to engage with digital to deliver teaching and learning. And that very much with this idea that one-to-one learning. So youngsters can use a device within their school setting across the curriculum, but then more importantly have something to take home with them to continue their learning and engagement with digital at home. But what we kept finding, Rob, is just, you know, huge numbers of children and young people and their families who were just either disconnected completely or just didn't have what they needed, whatever that was. And so the trustees and we decided to look at this from a different perspective rather than working exclusively through schools. And to cut a long story short, we started to investigate this in 2017. But actually then, you know, you'd say to people, you know, you realize that, you know, huge numbers of people are disconnected from the digital world, and people didn't get that at all. And that's because most of the information around said, you know, 93% of people had access to, but of course having access to and actually having it were completely different. And also the definition that was used, and I see, by the way, it's noticed they use this still in Europe and Africa, for instance. Have you at any time in the last 3 months accessed the internet? And you feel like, that's not really, engaging with the digital world and things. So we launched, with the thanks to Currys and the Institution of Engineering and Technology, the DPA. It was originally called Digital Access for All, but it's sort of transmogrified to the DPA, and I love it. It's been a fantastic joining together, exactly the dots that you talked about, of individuals and organizations who've been otherwise working in their own kind of specific ways, working in their silos is too rude a word really in this instance, because they've always had the community at heart and stuff. And the pandemic came along, of course, and helped to invigorate all of that and stuff. And so we launched the Digital Poverty Alliance, exactly the same reasons as you, about joining dots, bringing people together. So we're quite small, just 8 or 10 of us, but we have this wonderful group of individuals and organizations to talk about. And I'm pleased to say actually that group actually represents pretty much every household in the UK now. I think I'd go as far as saying every household in the UK. And then very importantly, kind of lots of different aspects of the way digital impacts on your life, whether that's finance or entertainment or your housing or whatever it might be. So we have a great collection of organizations. I'll just finish by saying we have the launch at the House of Lords at the end of May of our national delivery plan, and this is really where we come together, Rob, because what we've been looking at is how do we respond to this issue of individuals and particularly not being able to engage. And the answer is that everybody has a role to play in this, and companies particularly have a really important role to play in this, and that's not just about enabling people to access things, enabling people to access a device or connectivity, but of course making sure that when they do get to do that, that exercise is as safe and enabling and supportive and everything as it can be too. And so that's of course pretty much when I know that one of the reasons that we were introduced together, I think, is through one of our great ambassadors, Karen Elliott, who's a bit of a leading light on the ethics side and stuff. So that was when you and I first met, and I've been delighted ever since on that one. So that's our intros. I hope that's enough and not too much for people. But could we get into that bit now? The main bit about your role and motivation and things. So I noticed it is a global matter.
Yeah. So if I kind of give a bit about how I got into CDR. It's funny you said 2017, so I'll go back to 2016. Okay. So in 2016, I remember sat in Paris, and I put a presentation together as part of a global think tank led by Thierry Breton. So Thierry, then Chief Executive Atos, now EU Commissioner, introducing things like the Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act. And of course, this was a time of Brexit, of Trump. It was Cambridge Analytica. And I'd kind of been pretty much saying that we should be looking more at the impact of digital outside of the organization. A lot of digital transformations that I saw at the time were focused on making businesses more efficient, enabling them to kind of better communicate with consumer or citizen, but not necessarily thinking beyond the scope and the boundary of the organization. So we put together this thing called Digital Society, thinking about the impact of digital and data on the broader society. And I led a piece of research over a couple of years, working with people across Senegal, US, India, Netherlands, UK, France, etc., looking at that area. We did a global survey in 2017 about how people felt about technology, ranging from do you use your phone to do mobile banking, through to how do you feel about an Alexa device in your bedroom, through to how you might kind of feel about nanobots in your bloodstream, fixing disease. So it was things that were common versus things that weren't there yet. And actually a lot of things that identified out of that were rates of adoption. What made things difficult to adopt? What made things easier? And actually a couple of patterns which are obvious but nonetheless proven through the research. Convenience was number one most important thing. If it makes our lives easier, better, faster, then that's a good thing for that digital adoption. Second one was if it's a health benefit. Interesting, having been through the pandemic and kind of therefore some of the things that we've seen and adopted faster because we had no choice, had to do those things. But then back end of 2017, early 18, we were thinking about what that meant and how we described what an organization should do to have a more positive impact on people, communities, citizen society, the same things that you were talking about, in essence, about the same time. My colleague at the time, Christopher Joinson, who I still do the podcast with, said, how about we call it corporate digital responsibility? And we kind of dived onto Google and we're looking around, and I think we found corporate data responsibility was in Germany being used at the time, but we couldn't find anything. So we thought, well, that seems a good idea. Let's kind of describe the results and the obligations of a business as CDR. Now, we didn't know it then. I now know with hindsight and having done further research that there's the few earlier academic and government and business mentions of CDR as a term. So we weren't the first people who said, oh, let's do CDR. But what's happened over the kind of following years is that there've been lots of conversations like that around the world. Sometimes they've been in government, sometimes they've been in business, sometimes they've been in academia. And what happened, especially in 2020, is there were a number of definitions that appeared around the world. So common ones. Actually, I've got the book, Saskia's book, which she wrote in 2020. This is the English translation, originally published in Germany, defined CDR and gave a number of methods and tools around it. Michael Wade, IMD, University of Lausanne in Switzerland, published a number of books around innovation and digital. He wrote the definition in the MIT Sloan Review that was published in 2020. A number of definitions, others in Germany. Ethos Fund in Switzerland are involved in the management of the pension funds for the top 200 Swiss businesses. They defined their CDR principles in 2020 as well. So what I suddenly realized in 2020 was, wow, kind of everyone else is talking about it as well. Still perhaps a little niche in terms of kind of the conversations, but clearly, especially in Europe, lots of conversations around CDR. And I guess that's the point in time when I then thought, well, it'd be interesting to connect all that together, to understand kind of, if I'm a business, where do I start? Which definition do I start with? Kind of, how do I hook into best practice? Where's the best examples? Where's the worst examples? And that's when I put the website together, which was purely there as a connector of dots. It was to share information, and there's assets that are available for people to use. There's blogs, and there's the podcast, which is talking to interesting people all over the world about the things that they're doing. But that was the background to CDR, and I guess then led to the work that we did around the CDR Manifesto, and has then led to some other things which I'm sure we'll come to. But that was the birth of CDR, if you like, from my point of view, and the people who I've been working with and finding and meeting and being fascinated in the things that they've been doing over the last few years.
Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, as you say, it's just wonderful finding people who have the same passion and the same ambitions and the same kind of drive, but also wanting to come together, because otherwise, we've talked before about the implications of duplication of effort and things like that. And one of the things for us at the DPA, particularly during the last couple of years, particularly those sorts of years we talked about during the pandemic, was one of the things that hurt me a lot, was that you felt like lots of people are having to learn really quite difficult lessons, but they were having to do them on their own, partly because, of course, we were locked down and so communication was more difficult. But now, because one of the great things about tech, of course, is it can help speed all that sort of thing up, and enable organizations and individuals and countries, even whole countries. We've been talking recently to organizations in Africa who want to use technology kind of leapfrog forward and things. I wondered now, though, I mean, I'd love to hear a bit more about the principles, for instance, because I absolutely share those completely. When I first read them, I remember thinking just absolutely, not just from the DPA point of view, but it made such great sense and stuff. So it'd be great to share those with the audience, if that was okay. I would also then like, if it's possible, to talk a little bit about government. I mean, yes, you have a focus on companies, obviously, and we have a focus on, we're business to business, but we do have a focus on, it's more about enabling individuals and families to move on and things. But of course, government has a role in all of that and things. And so it'd be interesting to see what your take on that has been from your particular perspective. But initially, would you be happy to just talk about the principles?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
so we can do both, and they do link. So the work that we did in 2021 was to try and find a framework that brought together all of the definitions that existed at the time globally, recognise kind of the slight differences. I would say of the definitions that we found, about 80% were common, and then there was a little variation in each. So, for example, Saskia's is kind of, and Michael's was stronger around environmental and sustainable impact. The one that we'd done, Christopher and I and others had perhaps focused more around accessibility inclusion rather than environmental. But we brought them together under this framework, and there was probably 6 months work of myself, Michael, who I mentioned earlier, Dr. Saskia Doar, Oliver Merks in Germany, Tim Frick in the US. So a number of people who'd been fundamentally involved in their respective streams of research from the past. And we brought them together in this framework, which in essence was looking at the traditional CSR kind of circles, but through a digital lens.
Yeah.
So it was, just imagine it in the context of environmental, societal, economic impact from a digital perspective. And that gave us the 7 principles. So if I kind of fly through them, not in great detail, but if I fly through them, first one was purpose and trust, and it was common to all. It was at the heart of this is consumer trust, and understanding what this organisation that I am engaging with, what are they there for? Why would they want to use my data in that way? Kind of how are they making that true impact in terms of my life, etc. And key to that are things taken from the ethos definition around digital responsibility codes and explicit purpose. But probably the most important one in this space is digital governance. And I talk a lot around digital ethics boards and the challenges around digital ethics, AI ethics, etc., and embedding that. We could go on for hours about that alone, but that's at the heart of it in terms of just how do you operate and what part does regulation play in that. And second principle was fair and equitable access for all, very firmly in the justice, equity, diversity, inclusion space, but thinking about it in the context of everything you do. So don't just kind of have D&I as a well, we need to kind of hit some targets. It's how do you demonstrate that you clearly understand all the communities that you're trying to engage with in terms of product or service, or whether it's public or private sector, and embed that in the product design process. This not to be an afterthought, but to kind of make sure it's firmly at the heart of it. Employment rights, digital employment rights, kind of was part of that as well. The third one, promotes societal well-being, and the work that you do is at the heart of this one. So this is around privacy, data practices, responsible data practices, digital maturity, digital poverty, digital well-being, to make sure that people feel that the organisation has got their well-being at heart. So it's thinking about the impact of the use of data, thinking about the way in which it's processed, thinking about fake news, thinking about giving people access, giving people skills, inspiring people to be able to do things with it, and all those good things. Principle 4, considering the economic and societal impacts. So this is things like sustainable and responsible automation. We talked very earlier on the call around, before we started, about AI and large language models. So in thinking about the innovative impact that those things can have, let's also think about the consequential impact on society in terms of people's jobs. And it's not to say that we push back and don't do those things. It's just to recognise that we need support through that evolution and think about those broader consequences in a positive and proactive way. To think about use of algorithms and data that we use from third parties. So how many emails do we each get every day, it feels like, say, I've got a great data source, I'd like to sell it to you, but is that appropriately sourced, and is it right, and how should I be using that information? And also think about sharing the economic benefits in the most appropriate way. We've all grown up with the I can use your service for free. so long as I give you rights to use my data how you want. But are there alternative models? Well, there are alternative models, or even if we're talking about things like right to repair, for example, let's not kind of have devices that are throwaway kind of when they break after 2 years. Let's focus a bit more in terms of thinking about the wider impact on minimizing waste and things like that. And then the last three are very linking with broader sustainability piece, environmental. So principle 5, accelerate progress with the impact economy. How many times do I talk to large organizations who want to do things, want to make an impact, but don't actually have visibility, access, or ability to work with the startups and scale-ups of the world who are doing really amazing work in these spaces? So how do we connect those in an effective way that isn't destructive, that is a positive thing to be done? We had a big debate around what we said around offset. And there were those in the team who kind of didn't want offset any part of this. In the end, it is part of principle 5, but emphasis on verifiable, auditable offset. We recognise that there is a time and a place, but as I'm sure many people are aware, lots of debate around the authenticity of kind of all of that market. So firmly, we believe from an environmental impact of these principles, it's about making change rather than assuaging guilt, if that makes sense. And also to think about how we drive evolution of consumer behaviours, because, for example, many organisations will say, well, we do this because that's what people want. Yeah, okay, but do they? I mean, an example the other day, I was talking to somebody and they said, I've done the right thing for society. I've bought a hybrid vehicle. Well, I'm not sure that that's the right thing, because be aware of, actually that's probably worse than kind of what you had before. So people haven't always got the right information to hand to evolve their behaviours in a way that's doing actually what they probably intended. People probably want to do the right thing, but it is quite complex to find a path through that. And 6 and 7 are as simple as 6 is about, well, let me start with 7. 7 is about measuring the consequential impact of the technology that you use. So if we're talking about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and our data centers, and the Bitcoin or blockchain or whatever technology I'm using to use, how do I measure the environmental impacts of that? My argument has been, through the conversations, we could all be perfect around that. That's still not enough. So principle 6 is, how do we innovate and do amazing things using these technologies to solve some of those world's biggest problems? So irrespective of whether we're talking climate change or biodiversity or waste minimization, how technology is an amazing thing. I'm a technologist after all, remember I said at the start. So how do we focus on innovating to solve? And in a sense, if anyone's familiar with the work that the UN's been doing with codes, so the Coalition of Digital Environmental Sustainability. So June last year, there was the Global Action Plan was launched. I and the CDR community were part of that, contributed to that. And they've got 3 shifts. First shift is put the enablers in place. Second shift is to minimise harms, negative impacts. Third shift is innovate to solve. And that's why I just wanted to emphasise that point around 6 for me is, if we're talking environmental, 6 is the most important one, because it's about hitting them head on and using technology to do amazing things, but being aware of the consequential impact of the technology we use in, for example, in terms of energy use. So those are the 7 principles. I'll put a note in the chat that kind of says where they all are. That's the manifesto, the International CDR Manifesto, the founders I've mentioned at the start. What we've done over the past year and a half is translate that into 20 languages.
Brilliant.
Because if we're talking about inclusion and accessibility, for me, it wasn't right to say, hey, but you've got to speak English or German to be able to kind of get access to these. So it's really important to take it to different places around the world. And I mean, I was in Norway a month ago, and the Norwegian IT Association, IKT Norge, has adopted it, translated into Norwegian, which we've published. It's not a word for word translation. It's translated in a way that's right for them. And for example, one of the key things for them was they didn't like corporate. I probably don't like corporate actually, because this is relevant to everyone. It doesn't need to be private or public. It's all of them. But they wanted to focus on digital social responsibility in terms of translated into Norwegian, of course. But that for me is brilliant, because that's a set of organisations that are going, I'm going to accelerate our thinking because you, the world, have done a bunch of thinking, so we'll build on that. And it's not to say it's perfect or right exactly for them. They'll continue their evolution based on it. So that's the value for me of the manifesto, is it just kind of helps accelerate and raise awareness in places that wouldn't have otherwise had that awareness. I had an email from Slovenia a couple of weeks ago from a guy who said, you haven't got a Slovenian translation.
Yeah.
Can I help? Absolutely.
Wonderful. And Ukrainian too, just recently, which was brilliant to see as well. I know it's wonderful. There's so much caught up in all of that, and yeah, as you say, I really recommend the people who are listening in to go and have a look at that website and understand those principles in a bit more detail and things. But as I say, you know, there won't be anything in there that doesn't absolutely make sense, and it's great to have that all captured in one place. I hope too, by the way, that one of the responses that you talked about, the particularly principle 4, would actually answer one of the questions which one of our listeners, Jess Flack, led, which was around how much does or should social value play in encouraging participation in corporate digital responsibility. But
it's I think one of the big conversations that I don't think anyone's got an answer for at the moment is how do you measure social value? How do you measure the impact of the things that you're doing?
Yeah.
So and it's every week I'll have a conversation about this. So for example, we know that Principle 7 articulates kind of the various ways in which you can measure the energy or carbon impact of the technology. And equally within that, I can point to work that's being done by W3C, by Sustainable Web Manifesto, by IEEE and others around how you measure those things.
Yes.
Show me the kind of world's best realistic way of measuring in a way that kind of doesn't feel artificial, the consequential impact of the things that we do where it is good. So if we're trying to create a kind of, I mean, okay, if we're kind of trying to reduce emissions in terms of take carbon out of the atmosphere, we can probably measure it. But societal value, then that's really hard to actually do, because everyone will measure it in a different way. We can all approximate, or we can all guess. And I've had conversations with academics around the world around this. So there are approaches, but it is really difficult. But it's a critical thing, because for me, anything that we choose to do, there are consequential negative impacts that should be thought about. And there are, I would hope, generally always positive impacts. But it's about making sure that the balance is right. We want the one that's kind of having the positive impact to outweigh the harms, if you like. Because I don't believe, I'm not a big advocate for loads of regulation and policy that mean that people can't do this, that, and the other, because I just don't believe that the world will follow it. And I'm looking at it through a global lens.
Here.
Politics gets in the way. Whereas most people, most organisations get the kind of point around innovating to create value, innovating to create social value. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things I certainly worry about is that it's very easy for people who are engaged with digital and understand the harms and potential, the downsides and things, to try to solve that for people who are not yet engaged by kind of making their access more difficult in a way. And in a way, I just think this is obviously all the work we do is designed to be as impactful positively as possible and minimize negativity, but people have to find their own way of negotiating traffic and things, and all we can do is enable people to do it rather than stop them from starting to engage with it, full stop. And I think that's at the heart of this. So I'm obviously I come from a much more sort of people perspective, and I was listening. One of the things that struck me was this idea that we're doing what people want. And one of the struggles around digital inclusion and digital poverty is that people actually haven't asked large swathes of the population because they're not engaged, and so they don't know what they want. And people don't, and the individual wouldn't be able to explain what they want as well. So we thought for a while about talking to individuals about, you know, how they wanted to engage with digital. But of course, if you don't know what to expect, is very difficult to get kind of answers out of. And the other issue, which we're talking about at the Times Higher Education event next week, which I'm really looking forward to, a universities event as well, is about how the tech sector recruits into itself. And as a result, if it's not careful, it's not actually representing the views of the people that that need to be properly represented and things. So I think there's lots of work to be done, and lots of work I can hear share. And I'm looking at the chat and thing, I can see the range of views that are currently being expressed about how people might want to interact or not with that and things. But I've got to point it out about you, Rob, where I'm just sort of feeling like it's not really any more of a kind of you really, people have to do it. I mean, you really can't. Otherwise, what you're finding yourself is excluding yourself more and more or being excluded, not excluding yourself, but being more and more excluded from even things like democratic, right, as well as work and health and everything else.
Yeah, I think, I mean, spot on. And people come at this from different angles. So if I'm talking about, people have said to me over the years, why is it important? Why now? Kind of why should we do anything?
Yeah.
If I'm an organisation, why should I do something different? And I think I can probably say there are three things that are important at the moment. One is you can't afford not to because of reputational damage. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about reputational damage in terms of fines because of GDPR or the AI regulations that are coming or the environmental regulations are coming. You've got to be conscious of this, and you've got to kind of understand how your organisation is maintaining the right purpose and brand values with a population that is going to kind of consider things differently. And that's the second one. So access to talent. My kids will not go and work. My kids kind of being 20, 18, 16 are going to make their decisions about where they work based on different reasons from when I went into the workplace. So unless those organizations are appealing in the right way to those next generation of talent, then that's going to be a problem too. And of course, the other big one is money. So access to money, investment. If you look at private equity, it's all shifting towards ESG as a key measurement. I'll go back to Ethos. Those in Switzerland. So Ethos have done a CDR benchmark for the last 2 years, recently just published the second, of the top 48 Swiss businesses. It doesn't tell a pretty story. They've got experience doing around ESG. But the point there is, if I'm an organisation and I've just been given a poor score around something that's a measure of my long-term sustainability and positive impact on society, that's not good for my kind of ability to access and attract investment and funds. So I think there are increasing reasons why organisations need to share. I think from a people point of view, because it's also important. I mean, I used the word inspiration earlier. How do people know what they don't know? Is a really tricky challenge. And especially, I mean, I've got so many connected devices in this house that they are, but it's a nightmare. That's really hard to get them all to work. And that's me saying that. And I'm a technologist who's worked in the industry for ages. So actually, a little story aside, and I think it's relevant to one of the earlier kind of comments in the chat. 2014, I mentored a graduate who'd just started working in the business. And we had a competition at the time, and that person was Christopher, who I mentioned earlier. So I mentored him, and his project was to explore the impact of technology, digital technologies on the over 75s.
Right.
This was easy for me to kind of consider because that was my mum in essence. I mean, I was trying to understand. I had a conversation last year when the supermarket, because she'd got used to online shopping in the pandemic, but then they'd introduced two-factor authentication, which confused the hell out of her, and she was in tears, not able to order things from a supermarket. So thinking about how to satisfy kind of people's basic needs around kind of access to services and technologies, but actually also to inspire the art of the possible and what could be done. Because I can guarantee, I mean, both my mum and my in-laws in their 80s had no choice, of course, to start online supermarket shopping in the pandemic. But once they've got their heads around how that worked, transform things for them.
Yes.
We just need to do that with everything, not
Yes.
just about the core services by which kind of people have no choice, but to do so in a way that people feel supported, comfortable, not exploited, not fearful.
Yes.
Which, of course, as we know, is challenging both in terms of from a threat landscape, in addition to technologies not always doing things in a way that's logical or easy to consume.
No, absolutely. I think the whilst we're clear that there's work that we need to be doing at a national level, partly that's about trying to perhaps share messages and share resources and that kind of thing. But we know absolutely that the majority of change, and I think this is responding to some of the comments in chat too, is going to happen, is already happening, but will need to happen almost on a neighbour by neighbour basis, won't it? Because I was thinking about the people that you're talking about there, the people that they are going to listen to the most. We talk about, a friendly face in a friendly place kind of thing, are the people that they know and trust and things, rather than have a, hello, I'm from the government, that kind of classic knock on the door and stuff, and that might be sons and daughters, it might well be, somebody at a local community centre or something. But most of the change we're seeing happening are through local authorities and through local communities. And of course, we saw lots of that during the pandemic. Now, we're almost running out of time, which is really frustrating for me. So we might have to have a kind of part 2 or something if people have got the stomach for that. But one of the things I was really interested then from where you are right now, we are producing our national delivery plan in May. In fact, that'll be and at that point, what we're hoping is organisations like CDR, for instance, will be able to say that's a bit that we can take forward. Because this is something that we all need to participate in, and individual companies as well, and government departments and things. But how will you take CDR forward? I mean, I know that you're looking for partners and things. Do you have a program planned for companies to sign up to the manifesto, or how does that work?
So the way it's, I mean, I'll go back to, as it's been so far, it's purely been a connector of dots. Raise awareness, raise best practice story. There was a kind of point about in the chat about stories, telling stories. So to understand kind of what organisations have done, and maybe kind of at part 2 might be interesting to talk about some of the stories. So the work that Merck have done in Germany, or the Leader have done in Germany, or Yoti do in the UK, or Privately do in Switzerland, and all those kind of, there's such cool stories that are out there. But the manifesto has been around sharing. So I gave an example of Norway earlier, in terms of as a set of technology organisations trying to use it in that way. I would equally kind of point to organisations who've used it as a way. It's a holistic framework. A very big international organisation said to me, we probably do 9 out of 10 of these things, but it's interesting that you've got this holistic framework that allows us to understand the intersectionality between them. And that's the value, I think, that CDR brings. I think there's a design, you mentioned the support, so there's a supporters section on the site. It's not a commercial thing, it's an expression of support, and whether that's an individual or whether it's an organisation. I think one of the things that I've been amazed by recently is to see just how many people across the academic world are looking at CDR. I mean, people in Norway, Turkey, Netherlands, UK, US, France have all contacted me to say, we're researching this, or we're doing this, or the paper that Karen and I and others collaborated on and published in 2021 is one of our kind of pieces of study, if you like. So it's being able to bring that together as a community, because for me, that community could then work together and accelerate change. And I think that's my interest. And when I got an email of support from a CEO of business in Bangladesh a couple of weeks ago. That for me is when it gets really exciting, because that's a country, an organisation that if we can help through the awareness that we bring of those best practices or things to do or ideas, or connects them to somebody, because he says, oh, I've kind of got this great idea about X. And I can connect them to kind of somebody else who's been thinking about that same thing.
I agree completely. Absolutely.
That's what we're trying to do. It's the connector of dots. Now, we are exploring some things that would kind of deliver more tangible assets or more tangible methods or tools that enable organisations to kind of make changes. But at the moment, it's simply that connector of dots, collector of a community. It's a movement. Now, the most important thing is to then interface and interact with the other kind of key organisations, whether globally or locally. So I mentioned the UN earlier. Codes was important to me.
Yes.
We've put in a response to the UN Global Digital Compact, which is currently under consultation. Closes the end of the month, so we've responded to that. Karen and I are engaged with IEEE around kind of some of their standards and best practices. The work that Tim Frick does with both B Corp and the Sustainable Web Manifesto hooks into W3C, etc. So it's important to connect in those other organisations, other communities, other movements, trying to make a positive impact. Because look, these challenges are massive. None of us can do it in isolation, but hopefully we can bring enough clout, intent, money, brain power, whatever it is that each of us brings, then together we can at least kind of make some positive impact.
I love that. I love that. That almost feels like a good place to end, even though that I would regret that, saying that even as it comes out of my mouth. But one of the things we've been thinking is that, yes, we're focusing at the moment very much on UK, of course, but you already have this global thing. And one of the things we're aware of is there's lots of great lessons to be learned from overseas, as well as us wanting to be able to share our learning as we go along with other countries and things. But one expression that struck me from somebody I liaised with a couple of years ago now, and was that she said, so it's kind of what happens when we are all digital in the UK. And the answer is that globally, we are only as strong as our weakest link. So there is absolutely no point in everybody in the UK being, companies and individuals being, digital everything, if actually, as soon as we want to communicate or engage with other parts of the globe on other aspects, we can't do that. So we have there's not a responsibility perhaps, but there is absolutely a strong argument for enabling this to be happening at a global level rather than just on an individual country level.
Completely. For me, this has always had to be, we have to solve these things globally. Because the technology doesn't know the boundaries of geographical kind of locations.
Absolutely not.
The other thing, really important point, and I go back to 2016, my core hypothesis in 2016 was the digital divide is growing because it's not about connectivity.
Yes.
The point is, the pace of change of technology continues to accelerate away. If people on the call, for example, are not currently thinking, how in the hell do I use generative AI to do my job faster or better? Well, you need to be. And yes, we can talk about the ethical concerns and the GDPR concerns, etc. But actually, the point is that's a fundamentally game-shifting technology. And we need to understand how that creates value. And then it's the same thing. It's rather than it being about connectivity, we're then in generative AI as the thing that's come up that overtakes it.
Yeah, absolutely. And how quickly those changes happen, don't they? One of our ambassadors talked really passionate about, he was chief data officer, I think, at the cabinet, or at number 10 actually. And he talked about this range of skills that he had, which enabled him to do that job. And it sounded to a certain extent as though he was kind of, not showing off exactly. But then he said, but I know 5 years from now, most of those I won't need. There'll be something else that will replace those. And so the idea being that people need to recognize that digital inclusion, digital participation is something that you will go in and out of in your life, and unless you stay on top of all of these kind of things. And so it's something that actually affects everybody. But we want to get everybody onto the playing field to start with, in which case we can maybe let's finish a little bit, if it's okay, Rob, about your sports ideas and stuff. It feels a real shame to leave that there. And actually before we do that, just have a quick look at we had a quick question from Jess Flack, which I think we responded to. Something here from Panayotto, who I know is a researcher in this area. And she says, I wonder whether the sector or industry, a corporate actor, is best placed in posing different challenges and levels of necessity for practicing corporate responsibility. For instance, does a retail company and a banking company have nowadays the same role to play in corporate responsibility? Panayotto, is that the right? Is that the right question? I'm not sure I got that right, but we can come back to you separately, Panayotto, if that's okay.
can I put a very quick comment on that?
Yeah.
In Germany, it was the German government that was the prompt for CDR. So it was a policy and an intent to say, we need to think about things differently. And then it was the tech associations that kind of got hold of it. And then it was the business associations that got hold of it. So I think one of the challenges with CDR in terms of corporate digital responsibility is people sometimes focus too much on the corporate rather than considering it as organisational digital responsibility. Government, in collaboration with businesses, organisations, and third sector, etc., need to come together to solve these problems.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm absolutely in the same mind as you on that, and I think we also beginning to feel as we emerge from a period of lots of kind of not extrospection, I was going to say listening and gathering evidence and everything else, into a point where we need to start speaking much more loudly to the world at large, is to say that everybody has a really important role to play in this, and also that there is a kind of unique moment in time. If we don't grasp this and grasp this solidly in the next year or two, this divide that you talk about will be ever widened, and we might well end up at the point where it's actually almost impossible to bring that back in. So I think that I'm delighted that CDR is there doing its work and proceeding as quickly as you are and things. And I do look forward to finding ways of sharing messages to governments, not just in the UK, but in Europe and elsewhere. And we can explore that next time we meet. So I'm sorry we've not been able to pick up on all of the questions that have been answered and things. And what we will endeavour to do between Rob and I over the next few days, next week or so, is to come back to the individuals on those questions, because I think we've got contact details for all of those. Yes, we haven't even got into things like the metaverse, which EY Foundation was saying the other day is increasing rapidly, and apparently worth 13 trillion or something by 2030. So that's another huge area which we've not even begun to get started with. But it's been brilliant talking to you, Rob. Is there anything else particularly that you'd like to say to end on?
I think, in a sense, firstly, thank you, Paul, because the value for me and us in these conversations is that point around awareness and intent. So the challenges that we are all facing are complex and multifaceted and not easy to fix. But I strongly believe that through conversations like this, and like the ones that we're having day in, day out across the world, that we are at least kind of nudging things in the right direction. And anyone who's got any interest in supporting any of that activity in whatever way, maybe there's a language we've missed. Well, I know there's languages that we've missed that you'd love to help with, or maybe there's something in the manifesto that you think is missing, and because we don't see it as we see it as pretty kind of comprehensive, but we did a minor update to it after the first year. I'm sure we'll continue to do that. Or tools or ideas, then absolutely come and get in touch. I've put a series of contact methods, whether you Twitter, email, the website itself, or even knock on the door if you can find me. We can have a chat anytime. Wonderful. Yeah,
similarly, I've seen notes from Eddie to listeners to say that we'll provide lots of information and ways of catching up and engaging and that kind of thing. But it is absolutely, and one of the things I suppose I would add to that is that it doesn't matter what size the organisation or what size the individual is. This is absolutely as much about what an individual is doing at a local level to support their local school or a neighbour or whatever, as well as it is about national governments, for instance, anything in between. So people mustn't be shy. And it's not always about fixing the whole world. It's about fixing one person at a time sometimes.
Absolutely. And you said if there's one last thing. So one last thing then. So I haven't mentioned, but I know we talked about, I am a trustee of a little charity in the East Midlands called Inspire Plus. Inspire Plus exists to inspire primary school kids into healthy, active, happy, active lives through sport primarily. Apprenticeships are a key part of that, and kind of bringing apprentices into schools to support from a sporting activity and health. And I'm delighted to be involved in that charity because it makes a difference to people's lives. It makes an impact, and it is kind of brilliantly about sport and a bit of technology kind of sprinkled on it to help make it happen.
Wonderful.
So as you say, it doesn't have to be a world-changing thing, but it is about making a positive impact in whatever capacity that we can.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I personally look forward to a second go at this, Rob, at some point soon. Maybe not too soon, just to say give people a breathing space in between and things. But thanks to everybody who's listened. I'm delighted to see that Karen Elliott, the person who introduced us initially, was part of this as well today. So thank you, Karen, out there. And Rob, I look forward to more conversations with you and others in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cheers.